We are on the bottom of DAF Chav Ches Amud Beis. We're 3 lines from the bottom. That's where Rabbi Spitz left off yesterday. And I just wanted to recap the Chiddush of our Mishnah. This Mishnah only brings us one new facet of information, and that is, up until now, we've been learning that the principle of Zika is a rabbinic mechanism where it makes a woman that falls to Yibum, where there's Zika, a pseudo-wife, to the point where if 2 sisters fall from 2 separate brothers for Zika, they sort of negate each other to the point where I can't do Yibum to either one of them, but I have to give Chalitza to each one because it's only a rabbinic negation. It's not a biblical cancellation. Rabbi Shimon disagrees, and he says that Zika is a biblical mechanism. It works deoraisa, to the point where if 2 sisters fall to Yibum from 2 separate brothers, they mamish cancel each other out. So neither of them is subject to either Yibum or Chalitza. Okay, that's the Chiddush of our Mishnah. And the Mishnah then had gone on to say that if one of the women is an erva, one of the 2 sisters is an erva to, let's say, the remaining living brother, Levi. Let's say it's Levi's mother-in-law, who also happens to be his deceased brother's widow, and his mother-in-law's sister also, they both fall to him for Yibum. In that situation, Reb Shimon would agree that since there's no Zika between his mother-in-law and himself because she has an outstanding erva status, then he's allowed to do Yibum or Chalitza to the other sister, just like the Chachamim said. And furthermore, he also said that if there's only an Isser D'Rabbanan on one of the sisters, then you have to do Chalitza to both of them. So the Gemara is going to just point out why you need to teach me these 2 points, because they've already been stated before. So the Gemara's question is, what's the point of teaching me this if we've already learned this in a previous Mishnah, that when one of the sisters is an erva, you can do Yibum or Chalitza to the other sister? The Gemara says, L'Reb Shimon itzterich. I'll tell you why. You needed to tell me that even Reb Shimon permits you to do full Yibum to the remaining sisters. Al Gadaita Chamina, Hol va'amar Reb Shimon shtei achayos lo choltzos v'lo misyapamos, ligzor mishum beis achayos da'alma kamash malan. The reason is because I would have thought that it's one thing to say that according to the Chachamim you can do full-blown Yibum to the remaining sister, because in a normative case where neither sister is an erva, the most that I'm precluded from doing is Yibum, meaning that there's really a Zika de Oraisa, that I'm able to do full-blown Yibum to either one of them midi Oraisa, and the Chachamim said that because of Zika, we're only going to allow you to do Chalitza to either one of them. So the worst that would happen in a case of where someone, an onlooker, saw me do Yibum to one sister is he would say, I'm going to make a mistake and I'm going to allow you to do Yibum with when 2 sisters are normal and neither of them is an erva. That's the worst mistake that would be made, is to be in violation of a rabbinic principle. But according to Reb Shimon, maybe we would argue that if Zika is deoraisa, to the point where each sister does not fall for Yibum or Chalitza, and therefore if I were to marry one of them in a normal case where neither of them is an erva, I'd actually be marrying an Isser Eishes Ach. She would be an erva to me, because it's my brother's widow where there's no mitzvah of Yibum. So maybe I would think that in a case where one of the sisters is an erva, we should make a decree and say, granted that biblically you're allowed to marry the remaining sister, but we're going to be gozer to only let you do chalitza, lest you make a mistake in a normative case of 2 sisters. And therefore the chiddush is we don't do that. We allow you to do full-blown yibum, even according to Reb Shimon, to the one sister that's not the erva. So kamash malan. Let's go on to the next. Isser mitzvah v'chulei. So the Gemara's question now is going to be, in a case where, according to Reb Shimon, he agrees to the Chachamim that both sisters need chalitza, where one of them is an Isser mitzvah. Now remember, what does Reb Shimon hold in a normal case of 2 sisters? Neither of them fall to Yibum or Chalitza, you walk away. Okay? But here, where one of the sisters has an Isser D'Rabbanan on her, remember, like we said, like a case of a great-granddaughter. Let's say one of the 2 sisters is also my great-granddaughter, or my daughter-in-law's granddaughter, something like that. So in that situation, it would turn out that there's only an Isser D'Rabbanan, and here Reb Shimon says you got to do chalitza to both. Doesn't make any sense. Reb Shimon says that neither of them fall to Yibum. Why should the fact that one of them now has an Isser D'Rabbanan on her require me to do Chalitza to both of them? So the Gemara answers, Gzera Mishum Isser Mitzvah Da'alma. So the answer is because if we allowed you to walk away from them scot-free, the onlooker would make a mistake. He would say, oh, you know why this Yavam did not have to do Yibum or Chalitza to either of them? Not because they're sisters and they cancel each other out completely, but rather because of one of them has a rabbinic Isser, an Isser Mitzvah. And therefore a person would make a mistake and say that any time an Isser Mitzvah falls to Yibum, she gets off without Yibum and without Chalitza. And in order to dispel that, Reb Shimon requires you to give Chalitza to the one who has an Isser Mitzvah, so that you'll remember an Isser Mitzvah always requires Chalitza even in a non-sister situation. So Hatenach Ihi Achosa Ma'ikol Meimar. The Gemara says, but that only helps explain why you have to give Chalitza to the sister who's an Isser Mitzvah. But what about the other sister? Why does the Mishnah say Choltzot, which is in the plural, that both of them have to get Chalitza, even the sister who doesn't have an Isser Mitzvah at all? The Gemara answers, Gezera Achosa Mishum Lasadida. They threw in the sister as well, basically is the way Rashi understands. It's because of the fact that she's associated with the sister who's an Isser Mitzvah, we actually group them both together and say, as long as you're giving Chalitza to one sister, give Chalitza to the other sister so that there's no confusion for the onlooker. So the Gemara says, V'hagabe erva lo gazrinan. But one second. What about a case, going back to our previous case, where one sister is an erva and the other sister is not an erva? There, Reb Shimon is perfectly fine. And he says, remember we said you might have made a mistake, and an onlooker would have thought, right, that if you're going to let him do Yibum with one of the sisters, he'll make a mistake in the future, and there we're not worried. So why are we worried so much over here by an Isser Mitzvah, but we're not worried about an Isser Erva that a person's going to make a mistake in the future? So the Gemara answers, Shiny Erva de Migmar Gemiri la Inshi V'Kala Isla. The Gemara says because an Isser Erva is such a powerful prohibition that people will know about this. The reason why people will say, he's doing Yibum with the remaining sister because the other sister didn't fall to him for Yibum at all. And that'll be very clear that in the future no one's going to make a mistake to allow two sisters, when there's no Erva, to do Yibum to either of them. No one's going to make that mistake. But in a case of an Isser Mitzvah where there's an Isser D'Rabbanan, it's more nebulous, it's more vague. People don't have a full understanding of the takanas of the Chachamim, and therefore people will look at it and say, the reason why you don't have to do Yibum or Chalitza to either of them is because she's related from some rabbinic way, and they'll think that anytime there's a rabbinic prohibition, there's no Yibum and no Chalitza. So therefore the Gemara says, when it comes to rabbinic prohibitions, we have to be more machmir to protect the rabbinic mechanism because people are less familiar with it. Let's go on to the next Mishnah. Shlosha Achim. You now have a case of three brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, our standard case, where Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters, Shnaim Nesum Shtei Achayos. Reuven's married to Leah, Shimon is married to Rachel, and Ve'echad Mufne, and you have Levi, who's the available brother. Meis Echad Mibali Achayos V'asa Mufne Maimer. So here's the case. Instead of our previous discussions where Reuven and Shimon die very close, in close proximity to each other, or simultaneously, here we're dealing with a case where Reuven dies first, Leah falls to him for Yibum, Rachel is still happily married. And Reuven, Levi, therefore, could really do Yibum or Chalitza to Leah, because it's the only one that he has Zika with. The other sister's not in the picture, right? But instead of doing Yibum with her, he gives her a ma'amar. Now remember, a ma'amar is he gives her kesef kiddushin, which up until now we've been learning that it's only a rabbinic mechanism. It doesn't work midiraisa, it only works rabbinically. But as you'll see in just a second, that's actually a machlokas beis Hillel and beis Shammai. So v'achar kach meis achiv hasheni. So after Levi gives Leah a maimer, Shimon dies, and Rachel now falls for Yibum. So Beis Shammai omrim ishto imo v'halazu teitze mishum achosisha. Here we have a chiddush. Beis Shammai, we had seen Beis Shammai before, but only in passing. Beis Shammai is of the opinion that a mimer is actually a biblical mechanism to the point where it's his full wife. Once a yavam gives a mimer to a yavama, it's as if he did full-blown yibum. It's a full marriage. And therefore, since he gave it to her before Rachel fell to him for Yibum, by the time Rachel falls to him for Yibum, she's an erva. She's an erva of Achos Ishto. It's the sister of my wife, and therefore she gets off scot-free. Okay? And that's what Beis Shammai say. However, that's not how we paskin. Beis Hillel oimrim, motzi es ishto beget uvechalitza, be'eshes achiv bachalitza. And Beis Hillel say the normative understanding of Maimer, which is only it's a rabbinic mechanism. So really, when Shimon dies and Rachel falls to Yibum, Rachel is their zika to Rachel as well. Now each sister is an achos zekukaso, and he's not allowed to do Yibum with either of them. So what about the Maimer? We said that anytime you give a woman a Maimer, you have to give her a get, plus you have to give her chalitza. So to Leah, he's got to give both a get and chalitza, and to Rachel, he only has to give chalitza. Okay? And Zuhi Sha'amru, Oilo al Ishto, V'oilo al Eshes Achiv. And on this came the rabbinic phrase, woe to him for his wife, meaning the woman he gave a Maimer to, and woe to him for the wife of his brother, meaning Rachel. Because basically he's stuck. He can't do Yibum to either of them, and he's got to give chalitza to both, plus a get to the woman that he gave the Maimer to Leah. Okay, the Gemara now says, Zuhi l'm'utei mai. Why did you have to tell me this is where the rabbis applied their phrase, woe to him from this one and woe to him from that one? Like, what's your point? Why did you have to make a point of saying that? You seem to be saying that this is what they were referring to when they said that, meaning they weren't referring to another case. So the Gemara says, L'me'utei hachta Rebbe Yehoshua de lo avdinon kavase, ela ika Rabban Gamliel, ika Rabbi Eliezer. The Gemara says, we know that there's going to be a machlokas much later on in Yevamos, all the way on DAF Kuf Tes, which we won't get to for a couple of months. And there, the Gemara says that there's a three-way machlokas among the Tanoim about how to proceed in a certain case, which is not worth it for us to get into right now. But there's a three-way machlokas, and according to Rebbe Yehoshua, when you have these two women who fall before you, you have problems from your wife and you have problems from your brother's widow, and you can't stay with either one. So the Gemara wants to tell you, we don't paskin like Rebbe Yehoshua. There is a remedy in that case that we'll discuss on Daf Kuf Tes, either like Rabbi Eliezer or like Rabban Gamliel, but we don't go like Rabbi Yehoshua all the way over there on the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Tes. And we'll get to there. But that's the point of our Mishnah, to tell you, don't think that you're stuck in that case, you're only stuck in this case when you gave her a mimer. Yeah.
According to Shammai, if the mimer is actually the Raita, then you would still have to do Kedushin, obviously, like, eventually.
You mean Yibum? Don't you mean Yibum?
No, he's done. Mimer is like a marriage. Yeah?
Mimer, according to Beis Shammai, is a full marriage.
Right. So then, would he have to proceed then to
do what?
Oh,
I mean, this is a Yevama, right? This woman's a Yevama. Mm-hmm. It's not a woman off the street. Mm-hmm. It's a Yevama. So what would he have to do? The Gemara is actually going to discuss your question, but the question really is, what is a mimer? Both according to Beis Hillel and according to Beis Shammai. We know according to Beis Hillel it's like presenting Kiddushin. But what has to be done after that? Certainly according to Beis Hillel, you have to actually consummate with Yibum, with the physical intimacy. But according to Beis Shammai, what does a mimer mean? What does it mean? We'll see that.
And Hillel would say, Shammai would say you would have to go ahead and consummate.
Well, everyone would agree that you have to consummate in order for them to be fully husband and wife.
And would they have to do like a Kiddushin too?
Well, you never have to do Kiddushin with Yibum, right? With Yibum, you don't do Kiddushin. With Yibum, all you do is consummate physically. Right? That's what Yibum, Yevama Yavo Aleha. Torah says the Yavam shall come upon her, which is a euphemism for intimacy. And that constitutes the legal levirate marriage. Okay? Now, Amar Rebbe Lazar. Now, let's not get confused over here. We have two names in our Gemara today. One is Rabbi Eliezer, which is the Tana, and the other one is Rabbi Elazar, which is the Amora. So let's not get them confused. Here we have the statement of Rabbi Elazar. Lo tema maimer lebeis Shammai koina kinyan gomer di iboy la'afuke sagi la begita ela maimer lebeis Shammai eno kona ela lidchos bitzara bilvad. So Rabbi Elazar tells us a chiddush in his understanding of Beis Shammai. When Beis Shammai says that the woman that he gave a mimer to Leah, that means it's his full wife, it doesn't really mean that literally that it's his full wife. She's not really his full wife to the extent that were he to desire to divorce her at that point, he could just give her a get. No, she would still need a get, and she would need chalitza, because it's really not a full marriage. It's only a full marriage vis-a-vis Rachel, who's going to fall to him for Yibum afterwards. As far as the ability to deflect Rachel from actually falling to Yibum because it's his achos ishto, because it's the sister of his wife, that a mimer works. But it doesn't work vis-a-vis their relationship to make her a full-blown wife, meaning the ramification would be that were he to choose to divorce her, he would have to give her both a get and chalitza, just like Beis Hillel agrees. Amar Rabbi Abin af ananami tanina. So Rabbi Abin wants to support Rebbe Elazar's contention by going back to the first Mishnah in our parak. Now, what was the first Mishnah in our parak? It talked about our classic case of four brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters. Reuven and Shimon die, and the two sisters, who are achos zekukaso, fall to Levi and Yehuda for Yibum. Both according to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, lechatchila, you're not allowed to do Yibum to either one. You can only give chalitza to both. And furthermore, what happens if Bidi Eved, Levi marries one sister and Yehuda marries the other sister? They actually go ahead and do Yibum. So there Beis Shammai says, Bidi Eved, post facto, Yekaimu. Beis Shammai Omrim Yekaimu. Beis Hillel argue, by the way, Beis Hillel say even Bidi Eved you have to divorce each one. But the point is that what do you see from here? Yekaimu in lechatchila lo. Only Bidi Eved do Beis Shammai say that if you did it illegally, won't require you to divorce them. But lechatchila, you're not allowed to do yibum. So the question is, why not? Because v'isal kadaitach maimer leBeis Shammai kona kinyan gamor ze ya'aseh maimer v'yikna v'ze ya'aseh maimer v'yikna. I don't understand. Why don't you have a simple remedy? According to Beis Shammai, the presentation of a maimer to a woman automatically removes the zika off of her sister. Correct? Right? That's what Beis Shammai essentially say. When you give a mimer to a woman, it creates a complete marriage to remove the zika off of the sister. So by the time the sister falls to you for yibum, there's no zika whatsoever. So I have a very simple solution that will work even lechatchila according to Beis Shammai. I could give a way of Beis Shammai saying that even lechatchila you should be, Levi and Yehuda can both do yibum. Let Levi give a mimer to Leah. Let Yehuda give a mimer to Rachel. Therefore, they've precluded the other sister from Zika, and let them do a full-blown Yibum. So, Elamai, Doche Dechia Gemura. So the Gemara says, so this would be our proof that it's not a full marriage, but rather it's a partial marriage, only strong enough to deflect the sister, but not to make it in a full-blown marriage. And that's why Beis Shammai are of the opinion that lechatchila you shouldn't do it, only b'di'evet. If you did it, you're married. But the Gemara says, but wait a minute, that's not a good argument, because Elamai, Docha Dechia Gemura. So what is Rabbi Elazar saying? He's essentially saying that it's a full marriage only vis-a-vis the sister, but it's not a full marriage vis-a-vis the requirement of only a get afterwards. So if that's the case, Ze Yaseh Maimer V'yidcha, V'ze Yaseh Maimer V'yidcha. So you haven't made anything better. According to Beis Shammai, even the way Rabbi Elazar is interpreting him, if a mimer succeeds in completely deflecting Zika from the sister, then even lechatchila you should have a solution. Why does Beis Shammai only say b'di'evet you're allowed to stay married, but lechatchila you're not allowed to stay married? In other words, things are no better according to Rabbi Elazar. So elamai islach lemeimar maimar dehetera dachi deisura lo dachi hachanami maimar afilu lemandomer maimar koni kinyan gomer maimar dehetera koni deisura lo kani. So therefore, you really have no proof from the first mission of our parak, because whether you learn like Rabbi Elazar that it's not really a full marriage, it only works to deflect the sister, or whether you learn it's a mimer is a full marriage according to Beis Shammai, the only way to understand why Beis Shammai does not allow lechatchila to go ahead and give a mimer to each sister is because the case of the first Mishnah is where you haven't done a mimer until both sisters fall to you for yibum. And in that situation, Beis Shammai agrees. Since both sisters already are achos zukukaso, we don't allow you to just let a mimer deflect one sister or we don't give the mimer the power to deflect a zika that already is pre-existent. We only allow a mimer to prevent zika from setting in when if you did it before the sister falls to yibum. But if already two sisters have fallen to yibum, the mimer, even according to Beis Shammai, lechatchila doesn't have the power, or we don't allow it to, so to speak, to deflect the zika that's already in place. And therefore, it doesn't make a difference whether you learn like Rabbi Elazar or whether you learn like the standard understanding of Beis Shammai that it's a full marriage. You have no raya from our Mishnah one way or the other. Rav Ashi masni hachi. Now Rav Ashi, trying to explain Rabbi Elazar's position, states it somewhat differently. Amar Rabbi Elazar, lo tema maimer le Beis Shammai dachi dechia gemura v'tzarasa chalitza nami lo baya, ela doicha u'meshayerhu. Rav Ashi understands Rabbi Elazar to modify Beis Shammai even more. Beis Shammai doesn't mean, when they say that it's your full wife, that you're fully married to the point where you completely deflect the zika off of Rachel. You only partially deflect the zika off of Rachel. There's still a zika when Rachel falls to marriage after you've given a mimer to Leah. All the mimer helps is that it allows you to finish the marriage to Leah. It causes that such a certain situation where Rachel's falling to Yibum does not preclude you from marrying Leah. But it doesn't completely let you off the hook from Rachel either. You still have to give chalitza to Rachel in order to allow her to go to the shuk and remarry. So Amar Rabbi Abin af ananami tanina. So comes along Rabbi Abin and he says, this is implied in the Mishnah, in our very first Mishnah as well. So let's see how he understands it. Beis Shammai omrim yekaimu in lechatchila lo. That Beis Shammai, once again, in the case of the four brothers, and where Leah and Rachel fall to Yibum together before you do anything, then B'di'evid, Beis Shammai agrees that if Levi and Yehuda married the sisters, they can stay married, but not lechatchila. The Ital gadaitach maimer leBeis Shammai docha dechia gemura ze ya'aseh maimer v'yidcha v'ze ya'aseh maimer v'yidcha. And if you're going to argue that a mimer creates a complete deflection of Rachel to the point where there's no yibum or chalitza, so then why even lechatchila you should allow it? Let Levi give Leah a mimer, let Yehuda give Rachel a mimer, and then each sister is completely deflected from the other, and even lechatchila they should be allowed to go ahead and marry. So what does this prove? It proves to us that it doesn't create a complete deflection, it only creates a partial deflection. Ve'elaha ketani Beis Shammai omrim ishto imo v'halazu teitzim mishum achos isha. But one second, I have a problem with the way you, Rav Ashi, are explaining Beis Shammai. Because the way you're interpreting Beis Shammai, it doesn't mean, what did Beis Shammai mean? That when you give a mimer to Leah, she's your full wife, and Rachel leaves because she's an erva of achos isha. According to what you're saying, she doesn't leave scot-free. You have to give her chalitza. That's not implied in the language of Beis Shammai in our Mishnah. Ela yevama dechazia lekulhu chazia lemiktsasa. Yevama de lochazia lekulhu lochazia lemiktsasa. So the Gemara's conclusion is that we're going to really go back to our original understanding of Rabbi Elazar. Really, according to Rabbi Elazar's understanding of Beis Shammai, once you give a mimer to Leah, Rachel does not fall to either Yibum or Chalitza. She gets off scot-free. However, why is it therefore that in the case of our Mishnah, only b'di'evet are you allowed to stay married, but lechatchila you're not allowed to present a mimer? The answer is, like Rashi explains, Kolomar la'olam docha dechi dekash lachasam nami litchi lo dami lamasdisin dahacha dechi nafla vavad mimer. He says because in the case of our Mishnah, when a Levi goes ahead and does a mimer, chazi lakulu mili, he was able to do both yibum and chalitza to Leah. And therefore, the mimer has this full potency to be able to deflect any future zika that's going to come from Leah's sister Rachel. However, in a situation like the first Mishnah, where Leah and Rachel fall together for Yibum, therefore, the mimer that Levi presents to Leah does not have the potency, because a mimer only has the potency of full deflection when I present the mimer to the Yevama, I can do either Yibum or Chalitza. But when I can only do chalitza, which is where it's chazila miktsasa, I can only do a partial connection to this woman, then the mimer also has only a weakened power as well. And therefore, presenting a mimer will not completely deflect the other sister Rachel in the case of our first Mishnah. It will completely deflect Rachel in the case of our Mishnah because he gave it to her before Rachel fell to Yibum. Okay, I hope that made sense. If it doesn't make sense, then you're sane. Okay, boy, or at least it's understandable because it's very complicated. I mean, it's very logical what the Gemara is suggesting, but it requires you to go over it thoroughly in your mind. Boy Rava. So Rava now asks the following question. His question is, Maimer leBei Shammai nisuin osa o erisin osa. Very similar to what Bob was discussing a moment ago. According to Beis Shammai, when a Yavam presents a mimer to a woman, and remember, according to Beis Shammai, it's a biblical mechanism, the mimer. So much so that Beis Shammai said that she becomes your wife. And when her sister falls to Yibum, she gets off scot-free without Yibum or Chalitza, right? So the question is, does that create a Nisuin or an Erisin? Is she considered your full wife so that you don't need to do anything else? Or is she only considered to be like you gave her Kiddushin and you're still lacking Nisuin? So Amalei Abai Lamai Hilchasa. Of what import is that question? In other words, what are the practical ramifications of that question? So you might argue that maybe it has to do with the laws of inheritance, the laws of if the Yavam is a Kohen, is he metame for her if she dies, and to annul her vows. Now all of these laws really come in only into full effect once you have Nisuin with a woman. But if you only have Erisin with a woman, these three laws do not come into full effect. Right? If you only have Erisin with a woman, you don't inherit her estate. If you only have Erisin with a woman and you're a Kohen, you cannot be metame for her. And if you only have Erisin with a woman, you alone cannot do annulment of vows. You have to annul the vows together with her father. That's the halacha.
Before, we were talking about deflection. Like, so if you're just talking about deflection of the other woman, how can you say that it's nisun? And nisun is like making a proper wife, right?
Right,
so
right.
It's just a deflection.
So it could you could argue that, and the Gemara is going to make this argument momentarily, that Rabbi Lazar would agree. The only thing I meant to say that it's merely a deflection and not a full marriage is vis-a-vis the requirement to give her a get and chalitza afterwards if I choose not to go ahead with it. But I wasn't discussing other aspects of it being a marriage. So the Gemara says that even with Rebbe Lazar, there's wiggle room to say that it's like an Nisuin as well. We'll see that in a moment. So the Gemara says, I don't understand how you can ask this as a question. Because Hashta Arusa Ba'almatini, Rebbe Chia Ishto Arusa Lo Onein Velo Metame La B'chein Hi Lo Ones Velo Metamaas Lo Mesa Eno Yorsha Mesu Go B'Ksuvasa Avad Ba so Ksuvasa so Avad Ba Maimer Mibaya question mark. The Gemara's question is like this: if by Erisin, a full biblical Erisin, where the Torah actually prescribes how to marry a woman, the Torah yet still tells us that there are no laws of aninus, which means that if a woman dies after a man has presented her with erisin, he's still allowed to eat kachim. If and he's not allowed to be matame for her if he's a kohen. And similarly, if he dies, she's allowed to eat kachim if she's a bas kohen, and she's not allowed to be matame for him if she's a bas kohen. Now Rashi asked the question: since when do we ever see that a bas kohen has a prohibition of being matame to begin with? And Rashi says this is lav davka. It's not to be taken literally. It's only for symmetry that the Mishnah adds this, which is a whole discussion unto itself. Mesa ena yorsha, if she dies after erisin, the husband does not inherit her. Mesu gova ksuvasa, and if he dies after erisin, assuming that he presented her the ksuva after erisin, and as we'll discuss when we get to Maseches Ksuvas, it's not clear when you're supposed to present the ksuva to her. We only present the ksuva under the chuppah. So maybe you don't have to present the ksuva until you get to the chuppah. But let's say the husband does present her with the chuppah early on, just after erisin. she still gets to collect her ksuva. But the bottom line is, you see from here that a full-blown erison does not have the power to be considered a marriage for all of these purposes. So then certainly a mimer, even according to Beis Shammai, should not have that power because, like David was trying to suggest, a mimer makes her your wife, but it's still not a full wife. There's still deflection involved. There's still, like Rabbi Lazar had said, you're still going to need to give her chalitza afterwards. So why is this even a question? So the Gemara says, Ve'ela le'inyan mesira l'chuppah mai. The question that we're really asking is, does she still have to go to chuppah after you give her the mimer? Now, what does this mean? So let's go back to what I was discussing with Bob. When a man does yibum with a woman, the way that the mechanism of yibum is accomplished is through physical intimacy. The difference between yibum and a regular marriage is that, whereas by yibum, you cut to the chase, but more than that, it can be done against her will. It can be coerced bia. It can be coerced intimacy. It could be a case of rape. Post facto would be that they're halachically married. Whereas in the case of where, let's say, a man gives kiddushin to a woman and then he rapes her, can you say now that they had nisuin? No, that's not nisuin. There has to be a consent of her to go to chuppah. She has to go to chuppah, and it has to be with her consent. It can't be against her will. So the question now is, if you gave a woman a mimer, would you suggest that if afterwards he rapes her, since it's his Yevama, she's legally his wife? Or would you say that by virtue of the fact that he started the marriage process with a mimer, he has to finish with her consent to go to chuppah before he can consummate against her will in order for them to be halachically married? That's the question.
What's the invention of the mimer? What does it add besides Nisuin and Erison? What is it? Why did they invent this thing?
Well, the question is, was it invented rabbinically, or was it something that exists midioraisa? Beis Hillel says it's a rabbinic invention, and Beis Shammai says it's biblical. So, if the question only starts according to Beis Hillel, why was it added? The answer is it's added to preclude the other brothers. Let's say a guy is really anxious to do yibum, right? So he says, there she is. And he gives her something, right? So he's now precluded the other brothers from being able to do yibum, right? That's the purpose of the mimer, is to stop.
Same idea as the erison too. The erison accomplishes the same thing. First you have erison, then you have nisuin, so erison basically also precludes.
So shtar, you're saying.
Right. It's a legal contract between the man and the woman to prevent her from marrying anyone else.
Yeah.
But whereas erison works midioraisa, a mimer works only midorabanan according to Beis Hillel. According to Beis Shammai, it works even midioraisa. Okay.
But if he did it that way and he wasn't in line, because he's supposed to, in other words, if it wasn't, it's supposed to be. I think we learned that.
You start with the oldest brother.
Right.
You go in descending order. That's the point. Even if he's the youngest brother, but he gives her a mimer,
it's done.
It's done.
Uh-huh.
Okay. So the Gemara now asks. So the Gemara says like this: we want to know, is this like erison or is it like nisuin? So Amar Le, Hashta lo avad ba mimer. 1 second. Wait a minute. Oh yeah. So he says to him like this: Nisuin osa v'lo bayim asir l'chuppah, o dilma erison osa bayim asir l'chuppah. So is it like, is a mimer like erison to require her afterwards to consent to going to chuppah? Or do we say no, it's as if she had both chuppah and kiddushin, and therefore if he rapes her afterwards, she's his full-blown married, she's fully married. So Amar Le, so he said back to him, he says, I don't understand your question. Hashta lo avad ba mimer ksiv yevama yavo aleha bal korcha avad ba mimer mibaya? Question mark. Why should the mimer make anything worse? If he wouldn't give the woman anything and then he would rape her, then post facto halachically they're married. So why does the presentation of a mimer in any way make that any worse? If anything, it should only ameliorate things, but it shouldn't take away the ability of the yavam to marry her through rape. So the Gemara says, Amar le'in, sha'ani oimer kol ha'osa mimer biyavimto, parcha mimenu zikas yavamin, v'chala aleha zikas erisin. And therefore I hold that according to Beis Shammai, that's exactly the mechanism that's at play. Once you give a woman a mimer, you've actually removed her status of a yavama, and made her now into a married woman that you're marrying through the process of marriage instead of through the process of yibum. And therefore my question is there still a chuppah that needs to be accomplished, or is the mimer like both kiddushin and chuppah? That's the question. But I hold that actually you do make things worse by presenting her with a mimer, because now you no longer have the option of a coerced yibum.
What if this woman is, let's say today, totally out of it, nothing involved with Torah mitzvahs, just doesn't understand the concept? So you sit there and explain, she doesn't want it, let's say. She says, I don't believe in this. What do you do? The man says it's his obligation, but she has
You give her chalitza.
Okay.
You do chalitza.
That's it.
You can't force it. You can't force her. You said that if he rapes her, then
No.
We don't advocate lechatchila that a man should ever rape a woman. Chas v'shalom.
Right, but if
no
he
one's ever
did,
suggesting that.
if he did.
It's only b'di'evet if he did that they're married. So we would never advocate that a person should do that. So the Gemara says Toshma,
not ISIS.
especially not in front of the camera. Maybe. don't even ask questions like that. Okay, so the Gemara now says Toshma, Shomeres Yavam, Bein Yavam Echad, Bein Shnei Yavamin, Rabbi Eliezer Omer. So remember, what is our question? Our question is, once according to Beis Shammai you do a mimer, do you still have to? Are you still lacking chuppah, or is she completely your wife now? So let's look at the following brisa. Shomeres yavam ben yavam echad ben shnei yavavim. A woman falls to yibum, and whether she falls to one brother or whether there's more than one brother, Rabbi Eliezer Omer Yafer. If she takes a vow, then according to Rabbi Eliezer, either brother can annul that vow. Rabbi Yoshua Omer le'echad v'lo lishnam. Rabbi Yoshua says, I disagree. You only consider her a pseudo wife for the purposes of annulment of vows when there's only one brother. There, the zika is strong to that one brother, and therefore he can annul her vows. But if there are two brothers and there's not clearly indicated which one is the pseudo wife, which one is her pseudo husband, then neither of them can do the annulment. Rabbi Akiva Omer lo le'echad v'lo lishnayim. And Rabbi Akiva is the third opinion, and he says neither brother can do an annulment, even if there's only one brother. He can't do the annulment either. So v'havinan ba bishlam Rabbi Akiva savar ein zika afilu lechad. So in discussing this brisa, we clarify the positions. Rabbi Akiva is very easy to understand. He holds ein zika. Zika does not make her a pseudo-wife at all vis-a-vis the annulment of vows, and therefore it's very clear why Rabbi Akiva says even if there's only one brother, he cannot annul the vow. Rabbi Yoshua lechad yezika l'trei ein zika, and according to Rabbi Yoshua, it's also very easy to understand. He holds that zika only makes you a pseudo-wife vis-a-vis annulments when there's only one brother. Then it's a strong zika between her and that one brother. But if there's two brothers, then it's a weak zika between her and the two guys. Neither brother has the ability to annul. Ela Rabbi Eliezer nihinami de kasaver yesh zika bishlam alachad mefer ela l'trei amai. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, it's difficult to understand. How can the fact that there are two brothers, you're telling me that either brother can annul the vow? But we don't know which one she's going to marry. The zika is not strong to either of them. How can just one brother alone be able to annul her vows? So va'amar Rabbi Ami hacha b'may askinan kigon da'avad b'maimer ube'shamai da'amar maimer kona kinyan gomer. So Rabbi Ami explained the only way to really understand Rabbi Eliezer is that we're talking about a case where one of the two brothers presents her with a maimer, and because he presented her with a maimer, she becomes his wife mamash, and therefore he's able, according to Rabbi Eliezer, to annul her vows. So iyamart bishlam anisuan osa mishum hachi mefer, ela iyamart erisun osa hechi matzi mefer. Now, if you're going to tell me that a maimer is like a nisuan, then it makes sense why Rabbi Eliezer holds he can annul her vows, because only when a woman is your nisua, your full wife, after chuppah and kiddushin, can you annul her vows alone. But if the maimer is only like erisin, how could Rabbi Eliezer say that's enough to annul her vows? V'hatnan na'ara ha'me'orasa aviha u'ba'ala mefir nedareha. That her father's still in the picture, assuming that she's a ketana. We're talking about a case presumably where she's still a ketana, and therefore you would need her father and her husband to annul her vows. So even according to Rabbi Eliezer, if you gave her a maimer, how would that alone allow you to do an annulment of vows unless you say that a mimer is like nisuin? So this proves our point. So the Gemara says no. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, my mefer b'shutfas. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, yeah, well, you can explain it like this. You could say that when Rabbi Eliezer says you can annul her vows, it means together with her father. And therefore you have no proof from here that a mimer is like nisuin, maybe a mimer is like erisin. But wait a minute. Ula Rabbi Eliezer da Amar mimer lebeis Shammai eino koina ela lidchos litzara bilvad amai mefer b'shutfas. But wait a minute, according to Rabbi Eliezer, according to Rabbi Elazar, which is what David's question was. Rabbi Elazar had said that a mimer is not a full marriage, it only helps to deflect the tzara from creating a problem. So then why would he even be allowed, even if the father is in the picture, why would he be allowed to annul? In other words, obviously it's not a full marriage at all. So Amar Lecha Rabbi Elazar, Emar da Amri Ana, Eino Kona Elulidchos Litzara Bilvad, Delo Sagila Begita Leboina Michalitza, but Lahafer Nidareha Mi Amrinan. So Rebbe Elazar will tell you, because even though I hold that it's not a full marriage, that's only vis-a-vis the issue of her requiring a chalitza in addition to the get. But I could still very well hold that vis-a-vis the laws of annulment, she is his legal wife for all other purposes, including for the annulment of vows. So you see, the Gemara speaks this out explicitly, what I just told David a few minutes ago. Alternatively, Emer Lecha Rebbe Elazar, or I'll give you another answer. Rebbe Elazar could turn around and say, look, according to me, I hold that a mimer doesn't make her your full-fledged wife. But Ula Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak minicha. But it's no better, according to Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, who says, well, you gave her a mimer, and a mimer is like erisin, and when it says that you can annul her vows, it means together with her father. But my question to you is, mikatani yaferu, yafer kitani. It doesn't say that they can annul her vows, it says he can annul her vows, which implies that he alone. So therefore, you can't tell me that a mimer is like erisin and interpret it like he and the father are going to do it. It doesn't say that in the Brisa. So elahacha b'mayaskin. So the only way that you can explain it is like this. Sha'amda b'din upaskula mizanos mishalo. That we're not talking about a bichlal, a case of mimer. Rabbi Elazar will tell you like this. Forget about mimer for a second. You want to try and understand Rabbi Eliezer of the Brisa. How can one brother alone, when there are two brothers, how can one brother alone stand up and be made for her nedarim if, after all, there's not a strong zika to either brother? That was our question to begin with, right? It's a very simple answer. You want to know how it works? It's like this. You had two brothers. One was the older brother, one was the younger brother. Neither of them did anything. They just sat home and just schluffed the whole day. Neither of them, they were both recalcitrant. She's waiting to get, she wants either yibum, she wants chalitza, she wants something to get on with her life. They're not doing anything. So guess what? She goes to Beis Din, and Beis Din says, well, brother number one, it's your priority to do something. Either do yibum or chalitza. And he just refuses, and the other brother refuses. So we go back to the older brother and say, you got to do chalitza. He refuses. So you know what the Beis Din does? They impose a penalty upon him. The penalty is you are now responsible to financially provide for this woman. If you're not going to allow her to remarry so that she can have a husband who'll provide for her, then you have to provide for her financially until you decide what you want to do. But she's now your financial burden, so to speak. Now, in a case where a woman is a man's financial burden, even if they're not halachically married by any mechanism, you're allowed to do hafaras nedarim. You can annul that woman's vows according to the following shita. Rav Pinchas mishmei derava, dam Rav Pinchas mishmei derava, kol hanoderes al das baila hinoderes. That when you take a vow, you're doing it based upon the consent of the man who's financially providing for you. So since this brother is the financial responsible party for this woman, he can annul her vows even if they're not halachically married at all, neither erisin nor nisuin. The very fact that he's financially responsible for her, according to the Beis Din, is what allows the psychological link that he can annul her vows.
So that's a big stretch.
It is
that's employer. Let's right. The employer says.
The employer is different because he can always fire her. But in this case, he's completely financially responsible for her. But that's a chiddush of Rav Pinchas. But the bottom line is that you don't see a raya from here at all, whether a mimer is like eris and a mimer is like nisun, because according to Rabbi Elazar, we're not talking about a mimer at all in this machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yoshua, and Rabbi Akiva. Have a wonderful day.